Welcome everybody to the session A, and we will be talking about the accessible advantage, enhancing learning for every student. And our presenters are David Pruden, say that correctly, and the director of the Disability Resource Center, and Megan Cox, who is the Digital Accessibility Officer. And then just a few items of business, just to remind everybody to stop in for the vendor booths during the lunch break, and then we'll just go ahead and turn it over to David and to Megan. I don't know who wants that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you being here. It is a privilege for us to get to come and to meet with you today. Honestly, being able to do trainings and meet with faculty, and what I really love is if we can kind of actually sit and talk about your classes and figure things out. And I don't know that we'll have a chance to do that a whole lot, but maybe a touch today. But just know that in my office, that is our favorite part of our job, is when we get to kind of work with you one-on-one in more of a consultative role in thinking about accessibility and how to make the university and kind of all of its aspects accessible. So definitely you should feel free to reach out to the Disability Resource Center or to Digital Accessibility Services for more individualized kind of work anytime. Because we know, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, but the more that we can do to design things accessibly right from the beginning, the better the experience is for all of our students. And that's what we're going to focus on quite a bit today. Before we get into the meat of our presentation, though, Megan and I had this slide elsewhere, and then right at the last minute, we decided just to toss it right at the beginning, because it doesn't flow with some of the other things, and yet it is one of the most important things that we could ask you to walk away from today with, because it will let us do a lot to help you. So there are some new accessibility regulations that are coming into effect. We're supposed to be ready as a university to meet them in April of this coming year. And those regulations did a lot to broaden the scope of what needs to be done for accessibility inside of your Canvas courses. And it gave real specific expectations of what needs to be done in there. And frankly, as we look at it, it's a lot. And we are working on ways to do as much of that work on your behalf as we possibly can. And as we've tried to do that through the spring and the fall, we figured out that there's a few things that you can do that let us help you. And if we can get as many faculty and instructors to do it as we can, it will limit how much we need to come back and ask you to do down the road. So the three things that we're asking you to implement as just kind of new practices moving forward. It's a little late this semester for the first one, but we want it just to be a new practice that anytime you are bringing new material into a course that's from an existing course, right? You used it in last fall, and you're going to use maybe not exactly the same stuff, but it's going to be pretty similar this coming fall. We want you to copy that material across as soon as you possibly can. So City sets up those shell courses. Those are usually out there right after registration for students happen. Get your stuff in there, even if you're going to make changes to it. If it's in there, it allows our teams months then to be working with you to make it accessible so that you don't have to do a lot of that work. But if it's not there until the week before classes start, that doesn't give us very much time to give you assistance there. The other thing that we're finding is that in many courses, because they've been moved from semester to semester for so long, more than 60% of the files and the items in a lot of courses aren't even used in the class anymore. It's become kind of a repository for old materials. And historically, that's been fine. But the challenge with it now is we're working to implement some bulk processes where we go through and we do some accessibility work to all of the files inside of Canvas. We did one this year that went through hundreds of thousands of PDFs. And it put in like the information about what language it's in, the title of it, things that if you're a blind student are really important when you pull it up to be able to use that. And we found some ways to use AI to do that. But the problem is some of those bulk processes bog down and we can't get it done because there's so many files in Canvas. And what we can see is if we only had the materials that faculty and instructors were using in their classes, we could get through most of it, but we can't right now. So we're asking you to use a tool that's called the Tidy Up tool. How many of you have seen that or used the Tidy Up tool? Just one. Awesome, that means I'm making a difference. Okay, so the Tidy Up tool is a tool that allows you to have a pretty good picture of what's being used inside of your course, and it lets you go through and select on bulk files that aren't being used and to delete them out of the course. So that's the other thing that we're asking just to become a standard practice moving forward, as when you copy a course across from semester to semester, that you're cleaning up the files in it a little bit. The nice thing is it takes, what, 5-10 minutes to copy a course across, so that's a pretty quick ask. The Tidy Up tool, it can take just a little bit longer, but not too long, actually. And the final one is similar. It doesn't take that long to run the built-in accessibility checker that's there in Canvas. And that one helps you identify some common accessibility issues in your course, and then it guides you through fixing those. And the nice thing is it focuses on the things that are really easy to fix. Again, we're keeping inside of our office and with our teams the challenging tasks, and those are right now kind of actually remediating PDF files and that kind of stuff. We're hopeful that will limit how much we need to ask you all as instructors and faculty to do that, but we're going to ask you to do some of the simple things. Okay. We're going to do a couple different things today. So one, we're going to talk initially just about kind of disability and accessibility and students with disabilities at USU. We'll talk just a little bit about the concepts of universal design and how you build more inclusively from the beginning. And then we're going to talk about how those apply to your Canvas course. And that's where Megan's going to get more specific with you on some things that you can do that build accessibility into the course. But first off, it's helpful to have a sense for kind of students with disabilities on campus. And whenever I'm doing a training, I always emphasize the idea that disability tends to be a much broader concept than most people think of. Oftentimes when we initially think of disability, we tend to think of a visible disability, right? Somebody who uses a wheelchair or somebody who's blind. But disability is any condition, any kind of a physical condition, a mental health condition, anything that substantially impacts somebody is going to qualify as a disability. So if we look at the general population, about 27% of the population qualifies as a person with a disability. So if that's true in the general population, what do you think, don't go there yet, what do you think the percentage might be amongst college students? Is anybody going to take a risk? 5%. 5%? 50, so you think it's 27 in the general population, 50 in the student population, okay? Other ideas?
18, because I know that more older people tend to be disabled.
Okay, 18, you are super close. Yeah, so most of the time when I ask that, estimates come in around the like 5 to 10%, because a lot of times people are thinking similar to what you expressed, which is that idea that we know that disability becomes more prominent as people age, right? Hopefully all of us at some point will have a disability, because the alternative is you usually are dying young, right? Most of us are going to have either a short-term disability at some point in our life, Or as we age, we're going to age into disability in some way. And so it is a little bit lower in younger populations, but not as much lower as we might think. I'm curious why your estimate was 50%, because there are actually some good reasons to make that estimate. What were you thinking?
One, because people pick up disabilities as they get older, plus there's a lot of funding out there for those that would have time to go to post-secondary education.
Good. So
Yeah, so I think we kind of got a conglomerate of.
good. There are some ways to try and encourage students with disabilities to come into higher education, some funding sources and things like that. In most of the studies, it comes in at about 20% right now. You'll see anything from about 17 to 22% in the most recent studies. And we have some data from USU that shows that we're at about that same percentage of students who have a disability. Most people with disabilities, whether it's in the general population or here at Utah State, have invisible disabilities. And that becomes really important because you're not going to see a student with a disability when they walk into your class. And so it isn't that all of a sudden you're going to change what you've done in building your course, or you're going to change the way that you might teach based on somebody's disability. Rather, it's important that you just have it designed in and well thought out, and that the good teaching practices that you're using for all, in the end, they'll have a kind of disproportionate benefit to students with disabilities. And so just designing accessibly and designing well right from the beginning really matters. The other thing to know is that most of the students with disabilities at Utah State, they didn't use like special education services or things like that in the K through 12 system. Many of them, if they're using accommodations through the Disability Resource Center, this is their first time getting support at the university. And the other reason that that's important is because even though my office, we are out in the high schools, we're at orientation, that isn't when lots of the students, we connect with a lot of students that way, but we connect with far more students based on referrals that come from you as instructors and faculty and from academic advisors. It's when a student's expressing, oh, I'm really struggling with my mental health right now, that a faculty member says, oh, you ought to connect with the Disability Resource Center. Or a student says, I've just always struggled in, whether it's math or reading, right? Those expressions of long-term difficulty in an academic subject are often indicators of an undiagnosed learning disability, and academic advisors will help them get connected with us. So again, that's another reason why it's better not to wait until we know about a disability. You'll see on that list of disabilities there that the vast majority of those are conditions that you wouldn't necessarily see in a student. And so we want you kind of being aware and listening for it and helping students get connected to us. Any questions about just kind of that general information about students with disabilities on campus? Okay. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of universal design. And universal design is just the idea that we're going to try and create anything that we make, whether it's a product or an environment, or in this case, a learning environment, a course, to meet as many of the learners as possible. So spanning age groups, spanning students who work and don't, and all of those kind of things. We're trying to make it as flexible and inclusive and usable an environment as possible, and that we're going to try and do that during the design phase. Because if you try and do it after the fact, it gets far more difficult. And that's part of why I have this picture of a curb cut here. How many of you kind of are aware of curb cuts and why they're out there? Do you know a history at all of curb cuts and how they came about? Yeah. So they came about mostly in right after World War II, and as veterans came back and we had more wheelchair users, all of a sudden people were realizing the way that curbs in cities prevented people from getting around. And it took a long time, but eventually there were codes and laws that required curb cuts to be put in. But it was super expensive to go in, dig out a sidewalk, put it in. But nowadays, when we lay a curb cut, it doesn't cost any more to put that in, a few bucks more, but not much, to do a curb cut when we're doing it during the design phase. And you'll find that the same thing's true when you're designing your course. If you're thinking about accessibility at the beginning, it's not near as taxing on you as it is if after the fact we're trying to remediate and fix things that were designed inaccessibly. The other thing that's important to understand about universal design is that certain accessibility things, we would say they're necessary for some. Closed captions is an example of that. It's necessary for somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing to be able to have equal access to a video that you put in your course. But it's often helpful for everybody. With captions, what are the other times when captions end up being helpful?
Like if the audio's muffled or there's some kind of background noise.
Yeah, so bad audio.
Different language.
Yeah, so somebody whose native language isn't English and reading the captions helps support it. Do you use captions in any settings? I use them all the time when my kids are loud, or if you're at the gym. When I was at the airport the other week, they don't have the noise up or the sound up at all, right? The captions are the only thing on. So these kind of things, if we build them in, they end up being necessary for some, but helpful for all. So Megan's going to talk to you a touch. We're going to start with captions first, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about how you can make sure that captions are in all of your course videos. If I can find where I put the mic captions.
So in your course, if you enter any of your videos into your My Media, I don't know how many of you have heard of that, but it's basically like your own personal video storage space in Canvas. And this connects directly to a system called Kaltura that we have. And whenever you add a video to that system, it's just automatically captioned. We set that up a couple years ago, so it's just done automatically, so it will always be there. The nice thing too about if you use Kaltura to embed your videos in the course is those captions will show on the video for the students if they click on this CC icon. But there's also a built-in transcript as well, so they can read that as the video goes along. What I love about this transcript though is it's actually searchable. So if you're in your course and you say, it's really important to understand XYZ or whatever the concept is, that student can go and search for that keyword in this transcript and jump to that point in the video if they ever need to review it. And so it's just a really helpful learning tool for all students to be able to search that and watch videos with the captions.
So not only are captions themselves a good illustration of that idea of necessary for some, but helpful for all. Frankly, just being willing to put your videos up and to do lecture recording is a good example of that, right? So I work with a fair number of students who have disabilities that impact memory. And one of the things that we know about memory is the way that it gets boosted over time is that you do some interval learning, right? That you may need to review it again and again, and that spacing in between it makes a difference. And then, you know, if you have an assignment or something that prompts you to need to use it, the ability to go back to it can be really helpful. So being willing to record videos, to post them online, to have the captions in there, allows some students who have disabilities that might not allow them to fully process everything in real time right when they're there, to go back and access those videos to use them as a learning resource after the fact. And Megan's right, that ability to use the transcript to be able to hop just to the things that they need in a lecture has made a huge difference. It used to be that when we were telling students, oh yeah, go back and watch the whole lecture again, I didn't have very many students who were doing that. But now that they know that they can get just to the part where they need to review that piece again, I find a lot more students are using the video effectively. Questions about videos and captions?
So would you recommend, I'm with the library and we have a lot of videos on YouTube and we caption all of them ourselves. Would you recommend, because we do embed those into library courses that we have, would you recommend putting the videos in my
I think in that case, YouTube is okay. YouTube actually does have a transcript as well. I don't believe, if I remember right, that it's as searchable as the one in Kaltura, but I think the most important part is that we have captions. We have a way for it to have a transcript as well. So YouTube does offer that functionality if we have it captioned.
Yeah, and again, in traditional courses, it just ensures that it automatically happens and happens at a quality that we can monitor. And then if there's a deaf or hard of hearing student in your course, we'll often go in and then we send them out for professional captions. So we do make sure that in those courses we have an even higher level. It used to be that these automatic ones, we call them captions because they weren't very good, but they're pretty darn good now. And that's why we've gotten comfortable enough to turn the switch and let it just do the auto captions because they're really quite accurate now. Okay, I'm going to talk, and I'll move kind of quickly because I want to make sure that Megan can get to some of the digital accessibility pieces. But I'm going to talk about just some things that we see. Again, students with disabilities tend to be more strongly impacted by poor design practices than other students, and they tend to benefit more by good design than other students. So I'm going to just talk about some good course design practices that we've identified in interacting with students. These are the ones that we're finding are having the biggest impact. And one of those is just having Canvas itself be fairly consistent and easily navigable. And whenever possible, adopting some of the templates that City has created and puts out there. And the reason that becomes so useful is because for some students, moving from course to course, if every single course is dramatically different, and frankly, 5 years ago they were, every course looked completely different, and just trying to figure out, okay, in this course, how do I navigate it and what do I do took up so much cognitive load that it took weeks before the student was very focused on content. So the more that we can reduce the time that a student is spending just trying to get oriented to a course by using really clear and consistent templates, it makes a really big difference for students. The other thing is when you're using those templates, the more that page-to-page layout can be somewhat similar and that a student knows, oh, each module I'm going to go in and I'm going to find these kind of resources in this location. Again, that makes a big difference. Students with executive function disorders really benefit from that kind of structure. If each time they're coming to a new page, it gets hard for them to keep track of what they need to do and how they're going to get it done. The other thing is, and again, this seems self-evident, but I spend a lot of time reviewing syllabi. And the reason that I do is because there's a bunch of accommodations that we put in place that are very individualized, and they're individualized to your course. And so before I reach out to a faculty member, I have to go in and review the syllabus really carefully and see what's in there. And oh my goodness, the variability in our syllabi quality is dramatic. And that has a huge impact on students, right? So just going back to your syllabus and thinking really carefully about, okay, if I were a student, again, think about students across the lifespan, across kind of levels of digital familiarity, across, maybe they're coming from an international schooling system. Think as broadly as you can, and is what I'm providing in the syllabus really clear? Is it easy to understand? Have I laid out those learning objectives? And then am I tying the expectations for the course back to those? So one of the things that we'll have challenges with sometimes is if I've got a student with an attendance accommodation and you feel that attendance is really important in your class, but it isn't in your syllabus very clearly, or you've got something in there about, hey, you earned these points for being in class, but you haven't tied that back to a learning objective, that can get challenging for you to declare, nope, this is essential to my course. And we'll end up helping you do it, but man, it's so much easier, and we are legally protected so much better if it's just in your syllabus. So as much as you can, think about what you really expect from students and tie those back to your learning objectives of the class. The other thing that we've started to recommend, and this is a newer recommendation in the last few years, is that you work to create a rhythm to the class. The rise that we've seen most dramatically in the last few years, and it impacts students with ADHD, it impacts students with anxiety, depression, so a lot of the students dealing with significant mental health things, we've seen just such a dramatic rise in that. One of the things most affected by that is executive function. And so that ability to keep track of due deadlines, when things are due, just managing all of that, setting priorities, we've seen a dramatic shift. And the other thing that we've found is that the K through 12 system is not helping students prepare for that, right? My kids in high school now, as long as they get things in by the end of their try, that's great. They don't have to worry about deadlines very much. Now, in my house, I try and make sure they are, because I know that transition to college is harder now that high schools have removed that. But because we know that that's something our students are struggling with, the more that you can build a rhythm. Every Tuesday, this is the kind of, you have a quiz every Tuesday. Every Friday, these kinds of things are done. That rhythm really supports students with executive function challenges. And then also to support students with executive dysfunction, making sure that all of the things that are due in your course actually show up on the calendar. I'm still surprised how often things don't show up there, and students really rely on that and the to-do list to keep track of things. And then again, communicating assignment expectations as clearly as you can by providing sample assignments, detailed rubrics, things like that. Again, we talked about the idea of recording classes, but also we do encourage faculty to, whenever possible, share their slides with students. And when you can, doing that before class. And I know there are some pedagogical reasons why sometimes faculty choose not to do that. But again, we do find that has a disproportionate impact on students with disabilities. The act of taking notes is what we call a split attention task. So the ability to listen to one thing while writing something different, that is something that gets impacted by a wide range of disabilities. And so while note-taking can be really beneficial and we want students engaging in it, we also want to provide some tools that allow students that split attention task is a challenge for, to be able to engage in the same way, and having access to your slides makes a big difference for that. We want you to do that whenever possible in the original file format too. So putting them up in like the printed PDFs, all of a sudden that breaks all sorts of accessibility guidelines that we need you to follow. So just put them up there in the original PowerPoint format. Thinking about how to chunk your lectures into 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, I'm going to teach this chunk, and then we're going to do something, whether it's that you're going to have a little story or an example, or you're going to use some kind of a polling device to check for understanding. But the more that you can think in those kind of increments, again, for students who struggle with focus and attention, that makes a big difference. And this is one that I'll be curious about your feedback on. But this is another one that we've added in the last few years. And that is the idea of at least considering some ways that you might build into your course some flexibility around due deadlines. Now, I want to be careful that you hear what I'm saying. I'm not telling you that you should be flexible on all of your due deadlines. There is a lot that a student learns by needing to hit deadlines, and we want to teach those kinds of skills and abilities. But we are finding that that faculty are benefiting when they think of, okay, I'm going to say you get maybe a grace period. And some have applied this on every assignment. Okay, it's due on Friday, but you've got a grace period until Monday. And there's no penalty. And what we actually find is the vast majority of students turn it in on Friday. But that a student with ADHD, what they often do is procrastinate right up until that due deadline. And then they're either missing it or they're reaching out to you asking for an extension. We find that when there's a grace period built in, they procrastinate, and then they get it done by that Monday. And for you, that real deadline was the Monday one, right? But you've done something that helped kind of scaffold them towards hitting a deadline. And so some faculty have chosen that. Others have chosen, hey, we'll give 5 assignments that you can be a bit late on. Again, it allows you not to have to be vetting a bunch of individual requests. It's just built into your course. Everybody gets it. We find that that tends to be much more equitable than trying to do it on a student-by-student basis. And then the final one is providing timely feedback and doing that in Canvas and doing it accurately. So the other thing that we've seen a little bit from faculty lately is that they're starting to not enter grades into Canvas. Some have said, well, I'm going to wait because maybe they'll reach out and ask for this or that, and all of a sudden Canvas is not accurately reflecting where a student's at. And that becomes really challenging for some of the offices that are trying to provide support to students. We use some tools that let us get a quick glance at how a student's doing in class. And if it looks like they've got an A, but when I talk to you, they've really got a C minus, that becomes really hard. And frankly, I meet with a bunch of students and I ask them how they're doing in their class, and they'll tell me, oh, I'm doing great, I'm just fine. And when we go in, they're missing like 3/4 of the assignments. And it's just that faculty haven't entered it in a way that lets it, and even the student is kind of disconnected. What's that? Yeah, so entering your grades accurately, even if sometimes that's hard for a student to see, we're finding that that is so beneficial for them. So the more that you can do that, the better. Okay, any questions on these kind of just general universal design principles? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Megan for more digital accessibility.
So we've talked about this a little bit already, but just again, keep in mind that most accessibility principles also improve the usability of your course. It's going to impact all of your students for the most part. And then just again, be proactive about this, not reactive. That's where we see a lot of extra time, is when we're having to be reactive and try to fix things. And then to focus on these core accessibility practices, and we're going to go through all of these. But the main things that we try to focus on when implementing accessibility principles are headings, alt text on images, using descriptive links, making sure that lists are formatted correctly, and as well as tables, and then having good color contrast and using colors appropriately in your course. And then we've talked about captions a little bit, but just making sure that your video and audio is captioned. So the first one with headings. Headings are important because they provide an outline and visible structure for your content. So it's an easy way to be able to skim through a page in your course and be able to look at sections. But it is also helpful for our students that are using screen readers. If you mark something as a heading, it will announce that to them so that they have that same structure in a document as somebody who is visually looking at it can see those headings.
Megan, do you want to describe what a screen reader is?
Yeah. So a screen reader is assistive technology that will go through even anything on a computer and just read what's on screen aloud to the person using it. So with headings, it'll come to that point and it will say, heading level 2, this is our course, or something like that. And it just reads everything aloud as they navigate through the page.
Yeah, so a blind student will do it the same way we do. You look at the headings first and then you go back. A blind student typically wants to do that too, but they can only do it if you built it as a heading. Just making it bold or making it look like a heading doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
So is this all built in the Canvas, or like using like an Apple Reader or Dragon or something like that, in addition to built in the Canvas?
Yeah, so a student using assistive technology will probably have their own assistive technology, so they'll be using something like JAWS. There's one called NVDA that's out there that's pretty popular, VoiceOver with Mac or Apple. Those are the most common screen reading ones. There are some like alternative format kind of things in Canvas that will read things aloud to students, but when we think about screen readers, they typically have their own that they're just using for everything. And then when you talked about like things being built into Canvas with like accessibility stuff, there are a lot of these tools already built in, which is really nice. So on the right side of the screen, I have a demo of where you can find headings in Canvas. So whenever you're building your course, you can type out your heading and then just automatically format in the toolbar. Sorry. You can choose a heading level 2, 3, 4, and it's important that these stay in order so that somebody knows how its like hierarchy is. We want to make sure that we're going from 2 to 3, not 2 to 4. And then here's just a demonstration in Word as well. It has this same built-in feature. So if you're creating a document, you can designate it as a heading as well. And with just all of these principles, know that we have more detailed instructions on our website as well of how you can do all of these things. So I know we're going pretty fast, but it's out there and available if you need it. The next one is descriptive links. All links should be descriptive and have relevant text that explains where it will take a user. Again, this is especially important for our students that are using screen readers, because if they get to a link that's just a URL, all it will read out to them is www.usu and maybe not even read it clearly. And so having that descriptive text helps them know where it's going and what the purpose of that link will be.
And just an example of inaccessible, I saw this just yesterday. This same thing, the only part that was in the link was website, right? So if a blind student is hopping from link to link, which they'll often do, all they're going to hear is website. It doesn't tell them what the website is. But if you say university accessibility website, that's a descriptive link. Now they know where that link's going to take them.
And again, these options are built in both Canvas, Word, Google. A lot of the tools that you're using will have this option to just be able to create a link with text. The next one is alternative text for images. Alternative text, or alt text as we sometimes call it, is a short description